Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
Welcome to the Means of Grace podcast. I'm Jesse Ennis.
And I'm Kim Ingram, and we're with the leadership development team of the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. Thank you for joining us in this two-part episode where we are going to focus on intentional daily practices and periodic time away in order to strengthen our relationship with God. We are going to have conversations with several clergy and laity who will share with us about their individual practices in order that we might be able to think about how we can spend time learning more about our faith and growing in our relationship with God.
So let's dive right in as Angela Pleasance shares with us the importance of spiritual practices and the benefit of being intentional about spiritual renewal.
Spiritual renewal is something that came out of my family practice growing up, but it really did not hit home with me until 11 years ago. Not going into great detail, but just a little bit snippet. I call it my dark night of the soul that I went through. And it was a period in my life where I forgot my first love. Getting caught up in the daily grind of ministry work. And I know that sounds strange because everybody think pastors, we're up there, right there with God, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and then you have pastor. But sometimes the work can become, instead of a spiritual life that we live, it can become something that we just do as a daily work. And that's what it became for me, to the point that it became about Angela. And during that period of time, I began to withdraw from everything that I was doing in the conference. I was serving in Charlotte at the time at a church, Central United Methodist. And I remember it was the middle of the night on a Friday night. I was sitting in my room. All the lights were out. I was bawling before God. And I cried out. I said, God, I feel like I have lost everything. And clearly I heard God speak to my heart and said, now I can use you. And it was in that moment that I began to incorporate spiritual practice and spiritual renewal into my life. And so whenever I get to that place now that I think, okay, am I leaning too far away? I always go back to that night in that room, in the middle of the floor, all the lights out, crying before God. So that keeps me afresh in my relationship and connection with God.
Thank you. What circumstances kind of prompts you to step back and say, this is a time where I need spiritual renewal?
Well, it depends. It depends on a given day or a given week. I can't say there's one particular instance. I practice this every day. In the morning, my phone is set and it chimes at a certain time every morning and a certain time every evening. Every evening I go into my prayer room. I begin with the practice of the examen. And then I move from there into a time of contemplation, of silence. I sit for about 30 minutes in complete contemplation. And then I begin my study in scriptures, wherever the Spirit's leading me for that moment. And in the mornings, it's a practice, a little bit shorter, but it's morning devotions that I do every morning. So I don't know if I can pinpoint a particular thing because it's something that I do daily. But there are moments in what I do daily. For example, if there was a difficult situation, when I do the examine, I look back to see what is it that where I felt closer to God and listen to Him. And then what are those moments that drew me away? And so when I look at that every day, there may be something within that day that I felt really drew me away. And at first, I always want to project it out to something else that happened, saying, well, that person made me go far away from God. But every time I go into my prayer room and look at that, God will always reveal, Angela, look at you first. And this is what happened that you could have done different, that kept you close there instead of drawing away. So God keeps me real. He'll always put me up there. When I want to point the finger at somebody else, he'll always bring it back to me. So that keeps me real and keeps me grounded.
Awesome. How do you decide? I mean, you mentioned that you're doing ministry and that those of us who do ministry are very busy, right? And
yes.
With sometimes a lot of spontaneous things. Yeah. So how do you decide how much time you devote to it daily?
Oh, it's a non-negotiable.
Okay.
It's on my calendar, and I just did a women's retreat a couple of weekends ago in Shelby, and we were talking about how to do it better and not busier. And so one of the things I told them, I said, this is a non-negotiable on my calendar. So I don't compromise when it comes to that time. Even in a busy day, like yesterday, I was in the office at 7 o'clock in the morning. I didn't get home that night until about 7, and even though I was tired, I just wanted to roll into the bed. I said, no, got my non-negotiable. So put charge conference papers aside for the moment, get into my prayer room and spend that time with God. And I felt refreshed and renewed.
Awesome. So let's dig deeper into that. You said you feel refreshed and renewed
Every time.
How does that affect the rest of your day? Or how does that affect your time afterwards?
Yeah. This is going to sound strange. And I was just sharing this. I'm working on my certification as a spiritual director. So I had one of my meetings with my director this week. And I said, I haven't shared this with a lot of people because I don't know how many people will get it. And I shared it with him. That was the first time I verbally spoke what I'm getting ready to share with you now. And he said, oh, I get it. But it's almost like when I have that full day and I'm just really tired and I said, I can skip one night. It's something about my prayer room because I have a room just specifically dedicated for that. I don't do anything else in that room, but just specifically for my prayer room. It's almost like I'm being called to it. And it's hard to articulate, but I have one chair that I sit in. There's another chair that I keep open, but that one chair that I sit in, but there's almost like this calling and being drawn into that just fills me. And I can have the heaviest day, but every time I come out, I always feel refreshed and renewed. And the only thing I can think of is I'm very intentional when I start the practice. I play, before I do the examen, I will begin it with everybody has different things they like to listen to. I love Gregorian chants. So I started with Gregorian chants. And what that does is help center me. And I just imagine, even though I know God is there, but there's something about when you're intentionally putting your mind and focusing on, I am in the very presence of God. And as soon as I bring myself into that place, it's almost like it's just lifted. I went through something in the earlier part of the summer that really just crushed my heart. I mean, really crushed it. Had a difficult time. Doing that in the evening and practicing the examen really helped me to gain forgiveness in my heart about what happened, to the point that now, before, at the beginning part of some of you, if I had to talk about it, oh my goodness, I'd start bawling and just, but now I am so free and light. And it's something about that and helping you to walk in forgiveness that I highly recommend it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, you spoke about your prayer room and the chairs that you have in it. What else is in this prayer room that helps you to center yourself on God?
So I have, and I cannot remember when we did, it was the extended cabinet met one day, a couple of years ago, I think it was. And we were with, I think it was Blessed Earth. And we did these Sabbath boxes. And so since that time, there were a few things that we had in the Sabbath box. So since that time, I've added to it. One of my mentors in ministry who passed away recently, Bill Osborne, when it was many years ago, he went to Italy, and he knows one of my great favorite saints is St. Francis of Assisi. So he brought back from there, it was the tar that is symbolic of St. Francis, the Franciscans. I have a little wooden one that he gave me, so that's in my Sabbath box. Okay. So things like that are in there. One year for Christmas, our assistant to the bishop, Amy Cole, she gave me a little anointing oil jar, so that's in there. So things that mean something special to me have been added to it. And so that's it's on a little altar table, so that sits right in the center. And I have candles that are in there, and pretty much, and of course my Bible and some commentaries, but that's all that's in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who thinks they're okay? They don't need, they're busy enough and they feel like they're doing well. They don't feel like they really need to take time to do so. What would you say to that person?
Wow. Yeah. been there.
Yeah.
I was one of those persons. And not that I never took time, but I just felt like, well, I know I have this relationship with God. I can just keep going. But there comes a point that I realized that, well, no, Angela, you can't just keep going. Human strength is fragile and is for the moment. And we have to pull on something greater than our human strength. Even now when I talk to clergy and I talk about their Sabbath, and the ones who don't want to hear it, they say, oh, yeah. They try to brush me off. And I said, look, no. This is as important as breathing. And when you think about the breath that we take, how am I able to take this next breath? Well, it's the same thing as just living in daily life. How are we able to take that next step? It's only by His grace and by His strength and by leaning upon Him. So I was at that place that I thought, I really don't need this. But I saw the results of what happened as a result of that. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Please welcome Caroline Wood as she illustrates to us the use of art in spiritual direction.
Yes, I am Caroline Wood, the Director of Missional Engagement and Connectional Ministries for the conference.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Would you be willing to share a bit of your experiences with spiritual renewal?
Yes. So my particular brand of that looks like a personal and group practice of art and spiritual direction.
Okay.
For about 10 years, I've been part of a group on and off. It took a couple of years off here and there that does art and spiritual direction. And we get together once a month, 9 or 10 months out of the year, depending on the year. And it's for a half day. We might be reading a book together and then discuss part of that book and have a particular passage that might be meaningful or that sticks out to us. And so we'll process that as a group. We might have a poem we read that our spiritual director brings for that day. Mm-hmm. And then our practice is an art response to that.
Okay.
And then we come back together at the end of our time and process those art responses together.
Awesome. That sounds exciting. So what got you interested in this type of spiritual renewal?
Well, it's like many things, the Lord just I kind of trip into them, if you will. Mm-hmm. So this goes back to days when I was doing active planning with a youth spiritual retreat. Mm-hmm. And there was a book, Praying in Color. I did a workshop with youth at this retreat, and the youth were quiet for about 30 minutes, drawing their prayers to God.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so it really struck a chord inside me. And then completely separate occasion, separate event. I was actually at a Safe Sanctuaries training where my now spiritual director was as well. And she just was prompted to ask if I would like to join a group that she was starting.
Okay.
And I came into the practice that way.
All right. Well, what has been the most meaningful part for you about your experience in this?
Oh, my goodness. It's the way that God speaks that you don't even expect. So we go through and we collage is the medium we use. Okay. So you just do a Visio Divina, if you will, or Visio, yes, Divina. And you look through magazines, pick out these pictures that pick you out.
Okay. And
put them together in a collage form. And then we write and journal after the pictures together. And you write from the image. Mm-hmm. Well, the most meaningful sometimes are the things I don't see that some of the other people in the group ask about. Well, what about this in the picture? What does this person feel like? What is this saying? Or what's God's invitation to you in this? Have been the things that have been the most meaningful.
So this is very much focused on art. And a lot of people aren't super comfortable with their art.
Right.
So do you need artistic talent to be able to benefit from this?
Well, if artistic talent is a requirement, then I'm disqualified. So, no, you do not. It's a very personal thing. So it's really I'm an artist wannabe.
Yeah.
So I like to delve in a lot of things, but there's really nothing about this that requires any prior lessons, talent, anything, and you'll be surprised at how God just brings things out.
That's awesome. So how do you decide when to do this? Is this something that is a constant on your schedule? Is this something that you have to set aside specific time to do? What does the schedule look like for this?
For me, it's on my schedule monthly.
Okay.
But there are times when I do some processing this way on my own.
Okay.
Art journaling, that sort of thing. Just it may be a particular difficult time and we're not meeting and I just really need a contemplative practice to feel close to God or to seek an answer here or there. Mm-hmm. But it's prioritizing the time with the group. Okay.
And how do you see yourself renewed after one of these experiences?
Oh my goodness. I feel refreshed. I may go in tired and come out refreshed.
Awesome.
Without a nap.
That's great.
And I feel calmer in my spirit and calmer emotionally, closer to God.
I like that.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned that God surprises you a lot in this art. Is there a specific story that you can share with us about how he had surprised you at one time?
There was, I don't remember what we had read that prompted this, but in the group time that we were processing, one of the ladies just said there was a tree in the card that I had made in the collage, and she said, it looks like a panda bear right here. This looks like a picture, a hidden picture, if you will. Mm-hmm. So, and, processing what that meant in that context then was one of those great surprises. Another great surprise was there was a time when I was doing this where I was part of a cohort and I had a spiritual director in the cohort as well. So I would go to my normal group and make the art collage. And then I would, with the second spiritual director, kind of process again with her.
Okay.
And so the surprise came out of there was these cards are not just for you.
Oh.
They're for others as well.
Awesome.
And so introducing the practice to others and using them with others has been a big surprise, a pleasant one.
So how much time does it take to really put yourself into your art, if that makes sense?
Right. It's like saying how much time does it take you to relax and pray?
Yeah.
It's just quieting yourself enough to pray and to really listen to God. So it is up to the individual, or depends on the individual as to how much time it takes to get into it. But the expectancy going in also determines. So it has been, like I said, around 10 years since I've been involved in this practice. So I go in expectant.
Okay.
So it's easier to quiet. So when you, just like when you expect to hear from God, so it happens quicker or in your own individual way.
Okay. So if you're hesitant, it might take you a little bit longer than it would if you kind of created that space for yourself to do so.
Exactly. Well, And I can give you an example. There was a time when I was looking through for images, and there was a cow image that kept coming up. And I confessed in the group time I didn't want a cow on my card. So I just kept skipping it. So I turned a few pages, and then there were 2 cows. And I thought,
wow.
Yeah. I thought, okay, I better put this cow, or it's going to multiply.
Yeah.
And so it God gets across what God wants to. So.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. So how can people get connected to using art as a spiritual practice?
Well, it's easier than ever, to be honest, because there's such a hunger, I feel like, in people to be mindful. And there's a whole culture of people who want to be mindful and awake in life. So we have coloring books, adult coloring books now. There are spiritual directors. When I first started in this practice, I didn't know of very many. And now there are lots of spiritual directors. Maybe we can have that as a resource for people.
Absolutely.
I know it's on the leadership development site, but maybe we can put that list somewhere. But
for sure.
It's very easy to get connected into art as a spiritual practice.
Awesome. I'd like to introduce Kate May, who will walk us through the value of taking time away on a spiritual retreat.
I'm Kate May. I am the Associate Minister with Children at Centenary United Methodist in downtown Winston-Salem.
Awesome. Thank you for meeting with us today. I'm very excited to have you. Can you explain to us a little bit about your experiences with spiritual renewal?
Absolutely. So I have been able to take advantage of the Sabbath renewal grants from the Leadership Development Committee, and that has just been a true blessing for me, both in my ministry as well as personally, because I imagine I am not unlike a lot of people, and I find that it is really hard to rest and put things aside in my mind or in my body when I am at home or at work. And so to have the opportunity to step away, to go somewhere totally separate and by myself, has been the opportunity to take some time to just pause, to be with God, to think some of those big picture thoughts that sometimes it's hard to do when you're in the midst of a busy day or with a busy family. And so to be able to take a few days and go to Well of Mercy, which is where I have taken some time to go, has just been a phenomenal gift to be able to take.
Can you explain a little bit more about Well of Mercy?
Absolutely. So Well of Mercy was founded by 2 of the Sisters of Mercy from the convent that they are a part of, and it is in Hamptonville, North Carolina, which is in absolutely the middle of nowhere, which makes it a perfect site for a personal retreat. But it is set up simply for that, for personal retreats. There is no programming. There are community meals at lunch and dinner that you can participate in community conversation or have meals on your own. But the whole idea is to be able to be there and do what you need to do. They even have buttons that you can wear that say, "Please don't talk to me, I'm on silent retreat."
I love that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, so there's no pressure to be polite to people when you're walking around the grounds and see them, because everybody is just doing their own thing and creating their own adventure while they're there.
That's amazing. So how have you been able to fund this time away?
Yes, so the Leadership Development Committee has offered some Sabbath renewal grants, and using those grants, I have been able to take 3 different stays during the year at Well of Mercy that have gone from Wednesday to Friday. Well of Mercy is open Wednesday through Sunday, but with my schedule, Wednesday to Friday has worked really well. It gives me time to get there, to unwind, and to get to the place that I need to really rest in my spirit and in my body. And so that those grants from the leadership development team have just been a godsend for me.
Oh, that's great for me to hear. How often have you been able to take this time away?
So it has been about 3 times a year, and usually I am able to find places where I have a little bit of a hiccup in my schedule. The children's ministry doesn't really have downtime, is what I have learned in many years of doing children's ministry. And so to find the places where there's at least a little bit of a lull, or sometimes those times where I've had to make a lull. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes that's even more important. And what has been super helpful and has actually been necessitated by the grant process is to go ahead and schedule those out through the year. And that way I have something to look forward to. So in those super busy times, I can say, I know if I can just make it a few more weeks, I'll be able to go to Well of Mercy and pause and stop and just be for a little bit. And that is hugely restorative just in itself.
Okay. So what helps you decide when a lull is necessary?
Usually I figure it out too late. Yeah. That self-awareness, I'm still working on that a little bit. But I find that there are times when I have been telling people I'm fine for a long time, and then I tell them I'm fine, and I can feel deep down that I'm not.
That you're not.
And I have a really hard time even just saying, "Oh, I'm fine."
Okay. Yeah.
So my emotions let me know usually that I am well overdue for time away, and so sometimes it's okay. Now we need to stop. Yeah.
And so when you get to those times, what is like the minimum amount of time you think you need at one of these offerings for it to be effective?
Yeah. So for me, having that 3 days and 2 nights has kind of been a good minimum.
Okay.
Because I get to check in kind of midday on Wednesday, and it takes me pretty much the rest of Wednesday to wind down and let go of all the things. They have an amazing walking trail. Okay. And so one of the first things that I often do when I get there is to walk the trail and in my mind mentally make a list of the things that I need to let go of. And sometimes I'll even say things out loud like, I need to let go of planning for Christmas craft night. I need to let go of the craziness of figuring out family schedules for the holidays. And so that mindful time of letting that go usually takes me almost the rest of Wednesday. Yeah. So then I am able to get some good rest Wednesday night, have a full day on Thursday and another good evening of good time away. And then kind of some time on Friday, because I usually leave around lunchtime to get myself ready to re-enter the world, because sometimes that takes as much time as setting things aside is coming back, and again to try and do that mindfully, and whatever it is that I have learned or taken from my time away to be able to incorporate that as I go back. So that 3 day, 2 night has been a good rhythm for me.
So what differences do you see in yourself when you do come back?
I find I am more patient with myself.
Yeah.
I am more patient with my family. And I have a better perspective on my work, my family life, my relationship with God, because I think for me, those times when I really need to be away, it's often because I've lost perspective.
Okay.
And things that seem really, really important in the moment, I realize when I go away are not as important as I'm making them.
Okay.
And so perspective is probably a great word that is what I gain when I step away.
Okay. So do you always go to the same place and spend the time in the same way, or is it different for you?
So far, I have just been to Well of Mercy, and that has been... It's been one of those things. The first time I went, I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't really know anyone who had gone. It was just one of the opportunities that leadership development had kind of laid out there. And I knew I didn't need anything structured. And Well of Mercy was that unique space that offered time and space that was unstructured.
Okay.
And so being able to go and take advantage of that and realize while I was there the very first time, this is exactly what I need. And to find that thin space with God, it has been beautiful. And the interesting thing is the weather often dictates how I spend my time while I'm there. When it's really, really nice, I like to spend a lot of my time outside walking the trails. And they have this beautiful kind of screened-in porch that is freestanding. It's not really connected to anything, and it has these great hammock chairs. And I'm all for hammock chairs. I think they should be everywhere. But the last time I was there, it was cold and rainy the whole time. And so I spent a lot of time just in my room, which was also really good. I did a lot of reading, and I planned our Christmas Eve service. That big picture thinking again that is hard to do when you're in the midst of everything. But just to be away and be able to focus completely on myself. I think we as ministry professionals do a lot of focusing on other people.
Yes.
And their desires and their needs. And then as a mom, you do a lot of focusing on other people as well. For me, just one little person who has a big spot in my life, but to be able to step away and say, this is time just for me, and whatever it is that I need right now is super valuable.
Okay. When you're there, have you ever experienced something that you didn't expect?
Something that I didn't expect. Well, not so much from a spiritual perspective. God always surprises me. And so I am always surprised by the ways God meets me there. But on a more physical and personal level. So God gifted me for a children's ministry in lots of ways. One of those ways is that I eat like a child.
Okay.
I love pizza and cheeseburgers and tater tots and macaroni and cheese. And the amazing folks who cook at Well of Mercy try to cook really healthy meals and try to make it as gluten-friendly as possible and, fresh vegetables and all these sorts of things. So my first time there, went to dinner on that first night and was served. The main dish that night was Vidalia onion pie.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And, from a children's palate, that is not really necessarily what I would serve at children's choir dinner, for instance.
Understandably.
And so I learned very quickly that one of the things I do to care for myself while I'm there is I take a bag of snacks.
Yes.
So, that was an unexpected thing on my first visit.
All right.
And now we'll speak with Noel Sweezy. Noel has used icons as part of his spiritual practice, and he's going to share with us how that came to be and how we might also use icons in growing closer to God.
All right.
Hi, I'm Noel Sweezy. I'm the pastor at First Methodist Church in Stanley. People often know us from our campus of Common Ground.
So Noel, we have been friends for a long time, and I've really admired your spiritual practices that you have developed and have been important to you really throughout your ministry. One that I have been most fascinated with that I hope that you could talk to us a little bit about is how you have used icons to help you focus on your faith. And I know when you were in Belmont at St. Mark's United Methodist Church, you had an icon of Jesus painted on the side of the church. So I wonder if you just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I found icons by accident. Growing up in a small rural United Methodist congregation, we were never exposed to anything but the classic, white American Jesus. So, I was curious about other images. Obviously, in seminary, had stumbled upon iconography slightly. So when I just began ministry in England, there was a convent hosting an icon retreat. And I went to that, and they would just give us it was just a day retreat, and they would give us one of four icons. They went through four icons in the day, and they would give you a little introduction to it, and then just give you space to go be with God with that icon. And it stirred things that, there was mystery around spending time with this icon. It helped me to step into a greater immediacy or intimacy with the Lord. It wasn't comfortable, but stuff was moving. And so anyway, I got an icon and started using it in my prayer space, but it really didn't take off until I came back. I came to St. Mark's, my first United Methodist appointment, and I was young. There was a guy about my age who was suddenly diagnosed with mouth cancer, and ultimately began to die from that. Yeah. So I went to visit him. He accepted Christ, and I baptized him on his deathbed. And he said to me, I don't know how to pray. I now have to take morphine, and I can't keep my mind focused enough to pray in the traditional way of thoughts. And he said, I can't pray. And so I'm scared. I'm scared I trust that Christ is waiting for me on the other side, but I can't stay in contact with him to go through this darkness, and I don't know what to do. And I was a young minister. I was like, I didn't tell him I didn't know what to do, but I said, all right. So I just assured him of Christ's presence, but it troubled me. And as I was driving home, I just the idea of iconography hits me. Try to use another sense, and that experience of mystery stirring around just looking at an image. So I had already had a contact with Belmont Abbey. I called one of the brothers and I said, I need a dealer, and I need an icon dealer. And he took me to the center of Columbia, South Carolina, and maybe it was called Unexpected Joy, and it was an icon shop filled with images of Christ and the saints and soup for the homeless. It was a wild place, and it was a holy place. And so I was introduced to Cordis, the owner, and he started to just take me around and introduce me to the various icons. And then I explained the situation to him. I need an icon for this young man to help him connect to Christ through his journey of death. And And so Cordis said, all right, I'll pray about that, and I'll select an image of Christ. And then he said, I'll take it to my congregation. He was Orthodox. So he said, we'll have it blessed, and then I'll send it to you. So he became a teammate in this, and he sent me the image, and I carried it to the young man, and I said, all right. So we hung it above his, at the foot of his hospital bed, over his baptismal candle, and I said, okay, so this is how this is how you can pray. On morphine, when you're conscious, that you just look at Christ and you let him look at you, and that's all you have to do. So his mom looked at me like, have you lost your mind? So I left him. I came back the next week, and I said, so how's it going? Like, what have you seen? What's happened? And he goes, I don't know. He says, I don't know if anything really has happened, but he says, it's a strange thing. Like, when I look at the face of Christ, he says, and he started to point it out, the cancer had started to eat away at one side of his face, and his eye began to droop. And he said, look at the face of Christ in the icon. And Christ's face was exactly the same. His face was on that side, was sunken and drooping. This is the oldest icon, portable icon of Christ from Mount Sinai, the Sinai Pantocrator. And yet he saw his face in Christ's face. And he said, it just lets me know that Christ is not waiting for me beyond death, but he will die with me. And I was like, whoa, like this, I didn't know if it'd work. And it works, Lord. Like it just creates holy space. And his mother, like when I'm walking out, she was like, I would rip that thing off the wall if I could. Because for her, when she looked at it, she too saw the suffering of Christ, but she saw the suffering of her son. Mm-hmm. So he passed, and I came back and to meet with the family, to plan the service, and I asked if we could display the icon on the altar at his celebration of life service, life and resurrection, and she said absolutely not. One of the nights, she was keeping vigil, laying beneath his bed, and she said a presence came in the room, and she knew the Lord had come for him, and the young man struggled, like he did not go, and she said it when the presence came, she woke up. And as she turned toward him, her eyes went across the icon, and she saw that in the presence of Christ, that the image was transformed, and she saw the resurrection face of Christ. It didn't look like the suffering face of Christ anymore. And it had changed, which icons can do that. They look different at different times. And with the strength she got from that image that was abhorrent to her before, she was able to comfort him and strengthen him and say, it is okay. The Lord is here with you, and you can go. A few nights later, same thing happened, and he left. And she said, the icon will never leave this house because it's holy. It was an incident that taught me that how God uses tangible things. The icon in and of itself, I mean, you could argue about, okay, is it, but it's a tool that creates space. And that's really what all of our disciplines do, create space for us to encounter God, where we are, as we are, and for God to reveal some aspect of who God is that we need to receive and experience in that moment. And so we said to ourselves, came back to the church and shared that story with people and said, what would happen if we set icons in front of our whole community? And so we rented out billboards. I mean, that little church spent $10,000 maybe sticking that image with no no website, no nothing, just the image of Christ. And we stuck it on the side of our building, that same image that had spoken to him. And it became a ministry of evangelism then. Yeah, so we recently, we were working with our tweens, like our 4th and 5th graders, pre-confirmation group. Right now we're working on different ways to put our minds on Christ, and we're using different prayer practices, exposing them to different prayer practices. And a couple of weeks ago we used icons, and they just went wild. And some of them just came alive, instantly started to talk theology while they're looking at the images, and you're like, well, you're 4th grader. What's up with this? So I've even ordered an image for one of those kids because I could see that really spoke to, enabled her to pray, to open and connect with Christ.
So we'll get access to links or something to the resources that we can put in the show notes if people want to be able to learn a little bit more and know how you kind of access some of that. So would you talk to us about some other spiritual practices that you've experienced in your life that have helped keep you centered and focused?
One of the big things for me, from the beginning, in seminary, just simply learning that there are different ways to pray. That was the biggest thing that I didn't have to pray like they do in church. They did in church every Sunday, that you can pray, and that exploded my spiritual life. And I became hungry to discover different ways. Had a spiritual director, a nun who, Sister Peg, that was huge in my life, and she would challenge me to dance with the Lord, which I felt like a complete idiot. And she would say, I don't care how you feel, Noel, like just try it. And again, that opened up a whole nother aspect of how I can connect to the Lord through my body, which for us Protestants kind of makes us very uneasy. But right from the start was physical space, like tangible space that was, all space is sacred, but you need designated sacred space to understand that all space is sacred. And so finding that sacred space, whether it was at Belmont Abbey or ultimately we built, my father and I built a little chapel, a little hermitage on our farm in Shelby, which, by the way, is open to anybody for free who would like to use it. And then on Common Ground, when I came to Stanley 11 years ago, one of the first things we did was build a little bitty prayer chapel that's left open 24/7. And so many more people have accepted Christ through that little chapel than in the whole of my ministry. Just people going and encountering the Lord. People are hungry for God. There's so much it's faith. So many people are reaching for the Lord, and they are scared of the church. But our church, just by creating sacred space for people, has been powerful. Again, my spiritual practices, things that have spoken to me, have turned into these tools of evangelism, of helping people who maybe don't even know God, but just opening up to the God that is always reaching to encounter them. Most recently, the spiritual practice that is speaking to me the most is communal or corporate silent prayer. I just came from that at our church. We do that every Thursday morning, and at first I didn't want to give up my personal solitude in the morning. I was like, I hate to sacrifice that to be with a group of people. I said, I'm not going to be able to pray. But I have found that silence with others takes me to a whole nother place I can't go by myself. I can't explain that. It just it has more of a sacramental value when there are 2 or 3 gathered in Christ's name in silence.
So you offer that invitation in your church, in your community on Thursday mornings at what time?
Thursday mornings at Common Ground at 8:30.
And anyone can join you.
And we were doing campfire in the fall. We were doing around the campfire in the evenings, trying to, now that it's gotten darker, we may restart that in the spring. But again, we've been hearing from our community. People are hungry for space, and we need to give each other an excuse to just be. And when we do that, we have our outdoor worship service at Common Ground, and accidentally we put silence into the service because of miscommunication with the worship leaders and my music worship leaders and myself, and they thought I was going to go and I thought they were going to go, and we left silence during that first service, and afterwards people said, "Man, that was so powerful," and we were like, okay, so we'll act like we did that on purpose, and we'll do that every Sunday. And so we've done that over the years. We continue that, and new people come in and they experience that silence outside, and they say that was life changing. No one ever says my sermons are life changing. No one ever says my singing or my prayers are life changing. But by creating space and giving people an excuse and an invitation, just breathe. God's Spirit is always drawing us, always interacting with us, always whispering to us, always touching us. If we just will be still and let God can show off all God wants to. And just people come out wide-eyed. Children, youth, senior citizens come out of silence wide-eyed, like, who was that? That they tasted. The spiritual disciplines for me have given me a way to taste God. Like, I need a God who's more than just who I can think about or systematically theologize about, but someone I can actually get a hold of, or let them get a hold of me. And then my best evangelism has been offering those practices to other people and saying, all right, God, I'm not very good at leading people to Christ. Let me give them an invitation to meet you. You do the work. So,
thank you so much for sharing your story.
Oh, it gets me excited just to say it.
Join us next week as we continue our discussion on spiritual renewal.
Thanks, Jesse. And currently there are scholarships available for Western North Carolina clergy and ministry professionals to participate in some spiritual practices or time away. More information is available in the show notes.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you've enjoyed listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. That's WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Gojo Studios.